Good evening, everyone. Happy 4th of July. Thank you. I think this evening it's worth reflecting a bit on our country, as well as reflecting on the gospel and how the two this weekend in particular go together. These days, sometimes it's easy to sort of be down on our country. It feels like everything's falling apart, things aren't going well. Who knows where all of this will end in violence and rioting and mobs and whatnot. And so it's good to reflect maybe just briefly that even in the midst of our faults, what is it that's good about our country? So this morning I decided in the spirit of Independence Day to read the Declaration of Independence. It's kind of a long document. It's sort of boring at times. It's this whole itemized list of all the complaints that we had against King George and the British government at that time. But of course it opens up with those famous lines that all men are created equal and they're endowed with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the first thing that I think the church this weekend invites us to reflect on with regard to our country is that these ideals, that among the inalienable rights that we're all born with is the right to life, to liberty, and the right to pursue happiness. That these things do not come to us just out of the blue, but they only come to us because of Christ. It was unheard of before Christ that a major culture ever would have said those kinds of things. Quite to the contrary, it was very commonplace in virtually every culture that existed across the globe prior to Christianity to have varying degrees of slavery, fully accepted, fully endorsed by every aspect of the culture, and to have various aspects of murder allowed, especially murder, very sadly, of young people who are undesired. Exposure of children was a very common thing, of babies in particular, in these ancient cultures. Before Christianity, this idea that all people, simply by virtue of them being a human person, had a right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, life, maybe we could say freedom, and the pursuit of happiness, was simply unheard of. Where does that come from? It comes basically from today's gospel. That God decided to become a human person, one of those people endowed with the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to say that all of us human persons have one Father, and that Father is God. That it's not by virtue of anything you or I have accomplished in our lives, but by virtue of the fact that our dad is God, that we automatically have those rights. And it was that culture that came from the gospel that built up those ideals, such that even when our founding fathers, many of whom were sort of quasi-Christian or casting off Christianity a little bit, that they still had those deeply embedded in their hearts. Because by that point, 1700 years after Christ, it was basically common knowledge that those things were true. They just had to put them down on paper. So we can be grateful to the gospel for bringing us those ideals, and grateful to God in his providence that you and I live in a country where those were enshrined from the very beginning, the very foundation of our country. The next question, though, is this: how do I live out those ideals? In particular, the last one. Life, liberty, and notice it doesn't say one of our rights is the right to be happy. It's the right to pursue happiness. In the first drafts of the Declaration of Independence, they had life, liberty, and the possession of property. And they later scratched that and changed it to the pursuit of happiness. But it says something about what the founding fathers thought the pursuit of happiness looked like. It was the pursuit of happiness or the possession of property. And so what is it saying? What does pursuing happiness look like? It means having a home. It means having and cultivating and growing a home. A place that is my own, but also a place where I can introduce life and life can grow. That deep desire in all of us to have a home, to have a place where our heart is at rest, to have those with whom we can truly share who we are. But how do we achieve that? And that's the conundrum of the human race. How do I find that peace? How do I develop that home? How do I have it a place where life is and not a place where life shrivels up? Sometimes it can feel a little depressing, like my home is not a place where my heart's at rest. My home is not a place where life grows. My home is not a place where peace reigns. What happened? It all seemed so promising. It all seemed like I had it within my grasp and now it's slipping away. How do I pursue happiness? How do I develop that home? Well, Christ tells us again today, it's so simple and yet it's so hard. It's as simple as this. What is it? It's to invite Jesus into my struggle. It's to keep Jesus close to me and me close to Jesus as I walk through life. Now, sometimes I feel like, okay, no, my life is so screwed up, I have to get these things fixed before Jesus will come back into my life. First, I have to clean up my act. If I can just get this in line, I really should have done this, I should have done that, I should have done that, I should be doing these things. If I can just do those things first, then everything will start to click. That's actually not how it works. We are too limited for that. And that's a hard pill to swallow. Living in America, where we're raised to pick ourselves up by our own bootstraps, to make a living for ourselves, to make a life for myself, just work hard enough and it will come to be. That sounds great. And the virtue of working hard is a good virtue. But it's not mutually exclusive from the virtue of humility. The saints worked hard, but they were as humble as can be. The saints poured themselves out, sometimes to the point of death, to the point of actual martyrdom, and yet constantly humbled themselves by saying, "No, God, but whatever you want. I will do what you want, no matter how seemingly insignificant it might be." So this weekend, as we commemorate this good country in which we live, built on good ideals, ideals that ultimately came from the gospel, we say, Jesus, inspire me. Jesus, give me a renewed desire to stay close to you. Lord, how can I be closer to you? That's where the work comes in. If we want to do work, that's the work to do. And let me tell you, getting into the confessional could be the hardest work you do this year. Preaching the gospel through one simple, really seemingly banal sentence that you just haven't been able to say, asking for forgiveness from someone, saying the right words at a family gathering. You don't have to run around being the preacher guy, preaching fire and brimstone. You don't have to become Father Waltz at your family gathering. You simply have to be the one who speaks the word of love into a conversation. You simply have to be the one who doesn't agree to delve into gossip. You simply have to be the one who stands there allied with what you know Christ wants you to do. And that will preach the gospel. If Jesus wants you to get into the confessional, go. I know the line was long this evening, my apologies. If Jesus wants you to come back to the Eucharist, find the path back to the Eucharist. If Jesus wants you to be more loving to your family, say to Jesus today in prayer, Jesus, make my heart a loving heart. Lord, I want that thing. I want that peace in my home. I want my home to be a place of rest, a place of life, a place of happiness.